You're listening to Mental Health Unmuted, Grabbing the Ox. Mental Health Unmuted is a growing community of young adult and youth leaders in Illinois with an interest in mental health. And this is the podcast, brought to you by NAMI Illinois, the National Alliance of Mental Illness Illinois State Organization. This podcast features conversations with the Mental Health Unmuted work group, with guests and spotlights on topics that matter to us. This work group focuses on creating and applying innovative strategies that involve three pillars: anti stigma, advocacy, and building a community of support, providing the voice to emphasize the youth and young adult perspective. Disclaimer: we are not psychiatrists, clinicians, and we are not social workers, but we are experts in our own experience with mental health and wellness. We call this living experience. Our expertise are developed from our experiences as individuals, as young people, and our passions. Everyone has mental health. You are not alone, and more than enough. It's time to act and talk about it. Let's do this. Hey, yay! Welcome to Mental Health Unmuted. From NAMI, Illinois, this is Mental Health Unmuted, Grabbing the Ox, the young adult and youth Illinoisan mental health and wellness podcast. Recorded over a virtual platform, I am Mental Health Unmuted Director Techly D, and co-hosting today we are joined by Jack from NAMI Kane County North and Mental Health Unmuted members. Jack Warner serves as a member of the NAMI Kane County North affiliate and has kept the principles of advocacy and support near to his heart, as mental illness has touched his family. Anna Termolin. Anna is a recent Dartmouth College graduate who has returned home to Chicago to work in research. Annie Camps is a master graduate from Illinois State University and a local title holder within the Miss America organization, where she works to help others survive their own adversities. Maricruz Herrera is a recovery support specialist and mental health professional for NAMI Metro Suburban. They were diagnosed with a mood disorder due to a pituitary adenoma, ADHD, and PTSD. And Ariel Jones, previously a data intern with NAMI DuPage. Ariel now continues to work in public health and mental health advocacy in their county and state. The stigma of mental health is still there. It's relevant. It's still there even with so much progress that we've made. And I kind of feel like, and I'd love to hear from someone else in the room, how the isolation of COVID, I feel emphasized that conversation of we need to be addressing stigma so that others are able to have that conversation, and mental health being discussed at a more national level, not just within our state. And I feel that kind of opened the door for a lot of conversations to happen that were not happening before.
I like to say that we all started focusing on mental illness because we were stuck in the house only talking to ourselves all day. But I definitely appreciate that it opened up the conversation and made it something that was more widely talked about on news sources, like you said, and was taken seriously. And then the emergence of virtual mental health appointments and virtual therapy. I mean, there are therapy services that are completely online because that was brought up during COVID, because we couldn't even go get support services when we were struggling locked inside of our homes. So that's also a blessing that I've thought about. And that definitely destigmatizes therapy itself, because now it's not heading into an office where you have to sit and everyone sees you. You know, you can go to therapy. I've gone to therapy while folding my laundry before. And it's really normalizing the experience for me. And it's something that I'm thankful for out of COVID, which is kind of odd when COVID is such a terrible thing and isolation was a terrible thing, but there were some positives.
I totally agree that I think COVID has opened up the conversation of mental health a lot more and made people more open to sharing their stories. I think along maybe with the growth of social media and people feeling more confident sharing their mental health stories on social media was a really powerful thing, I think, for me to see. I was lucky to go to a really progressive high school the beginning of high school, I definitely didn't know that much about mental health. I didn't look for it as much until I was like, went to the doctor. I was like, I'm having such bad heart palpitations. I think I'm dying. Um, and they were like, no, you're just anxious. And then over the next few years in talking to friends, we were like, wait, we all have experiences with this, and we all have experiences with our family having mental health stuff going on too. So why don't we talk about it more? And luckily, my high school let me and a few friends start a mental health awareness week that I think is still going on now. And college, definitely similar to Annie, was a place where they talked about mental health a lot more. But personally, I saw a little bit of a shift where at my school it was almost something to brag about not or to brag about being able to deal with it without help. So, like, if people were having trouble with mental health and having trouble getting things done, then it was often looked at more, well, everyone else has mental health issues, why can't you do it? Which I thought was an interesting or a really bad shift, but an interesting shift because of the way that mental health was more spoken about.
I find it interesting how much an environment such as like a school can impact your perspective and your personal experience when it comes to mental health. Like Anna, I want to just kind of in bold something that you said, which was your, but they said like just anxiety. And then everyone is saying, I just have anxiety. And but then there's so much stigmatic language when talking and just trying to even break that barrier when it comes to mental health. Like, oh, you could be doing better. And this it's toxic happiness or positivity. And I felt like it trivialized the conversation a bit and then made it harder to reach out to people because you weren't sure who within that environment was an okay person to talk about it, who wasn't going to judge you on it and wasn't going to allow whatever the situation was to make assumptions of your character. And so when you said that, I felt that. And I'm like, yeah, that is an experience that I've had of people in that misconception assuming something else when it's like, no, hold on, that's not what I'm referring to. Or, hey, you're contributing to this environment in an unhealthy manner. And at 11 or 12, you don't really have the language yet. You can't say, hey, you're influencing the environment and creating a toxic environment that I don't want to be in anymore. It's more like, hey, can you just stop? Can you shut up? But like, where are we supposed to learn that language when you're young? On that note, is there a way that we can shift language around mental health to be less stigmatic?
I have to be honest with you. This is a question that stumps me. Um, I try not to, obviously, in harmful ways, but you never know unless you actually take a deep dive into every experience and how you approach it. And I definitely know that in previous years, I wish that I had been kinder in conversation when talking with and about my mom and about my own experiences. So, I mean, just being so aware and trying to educate yourself on how to have conversations and open up the floor and make everyone feel like they have a place at the table where they don't feel like they're being stigmatized. But I definitely need to do more examining when looking at my own conversations and how I use my own language.
Yeah, Annie, I definitely think that I'm in the same boat. I don't know if I've really examined myself enough in terms of what am I doing to like actively be less stigmatic during conversations about mental health or speaking with people who are sharing stories of mental illness. But I definitely think one of the biggest things that it comes down to is validation. And if, for whatever group you're in and if it's a friend who's coming to you talking about certain mental health conditions they're experiencing and just validating it and not definitely hearing them out and not making it about you or the language that you're using, making it very empathetic and offering up assistance. But yeah, I definitely think that it's something that I am also working on, is that actively making my language around mental health being less stigmatic. I think that it's something that I'm sure everybody needs work on.
I totally agree, and am always trying to reflect on my own language surrounding mental health, and will continue because obviously I have a lot of growth. But One thing that I think about a lot to try and reduce the stigma around mental health is to avoid using mental health disorders as adjectives or throwing them around trivially. There is like a difference between DSM-5 diagnoses and having a symptoms of a disorder. A lot of people that I've been around did have most did have diagnosed illnesses, but I think in media we often see people using terms to diagnose like certain behaviors and not even using them correctly. We see this a lot with OCD and bipolar disorder, I think, the most, with people throwing them around. And I even personally try to avoid the word psycho. I think they all can contribute just a little bits to mental health stigma.
Yeah, I thank you so much, everyone. I think one of the main things I was hearing a lot from everyone that just kept resonating was community. The aspect of creating a space where you can talk about mental health. And I like to think of everybody has mental health, right? Because everybody has physical health, but then we have mental illness, and these are diagnoses that are again diagnosed and maybe something that you live, that most people live for the rest of their lives. And that's a journey that a lot of people would like other members in the community to be able to talk about it. So I think the best way to help with the stigmatizing language that continues to happen is just having an open discussion. Being uncomfortable is the best way to find a new level of comfort, and then get out of that comfort and find a new level of comfort or a new level of understanding. So having discussions, understanding that people may make mistakes, but that doesn't mean that they can learn from it. And being hopeful that everybody can continue to grow from those conversations. Mental health literacy, I think, is the best way that we can destigmatize mental health illnesses and mental health conversations, because a lot of people don't have access to mental health literacy. A lot of people don't understand that they went through postpartum depression, that hormones can cause mental health conditions or symptoms of mental health. Having those conversations at a very early age, because again, mental health is important to everyone, because everybody has mental health, will allow us to break that stigma and open that discussion and normalize it. I think the one thing that I really love was Annie talking about having therapy and having their laundry in their hands. And it's like, yes, everybody should be doing that because they want to continue to want to grow in those areas, because mental health is super important.
I have a question for you all, which has been on my mind since we started talking about stigma, and it came back up in my head when Annie mentioned positive stigmas. I feel the term normalization to be thrown around quite frequently when the conversation comes to the stigma and advocacy. It's usually used, in my experience with communities, we want to normalize this, we want to normalize that. Something that I have done in my language is shift from saying I want it normalized to saying I want it destigmatized. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on this, because this has bothered me for a long period of time. And Annie put this really well, that just because it's common does not mean it is normal. And while there is a high statistic for individuals being diagnosed with mental health disorders, but I'm not fond of the term normalization when it comes to mental health. Like, how do you guys feel about destigmatization?
I think that the term destigmatization just has so much more weight and so much more power to it than just saying normalization. That's what I would respond with right away, is that I think when you would in like a casual conversation, if you were talking about this and saying that, you want something to be destigmatized rather than normalized, I think that the person listening would definitely feel the power that that term has. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Techly.
I also agree. I am not a fan of the word normalization. I think destigmatization also is going to encompass destigmatization of treatment for mental health or disorders and mental illness, because destigmatization should also, I feel like it also acknowledges like, hey, like while other people are going through the same thing, so you don't feel alone, but you also, these are some options so that you don't have to feel this way all the time. And at least one of my goals with destigmatization stigmatization is destigmatization of treatment, because I think it is really stigmatized and that prevents people from getting resources that could be really helpful.
More or less of the gist of what I think I'm getting from you all is that in general, we want to make these conversations safer, more productive, and I guess, I mean, you really want to avoid saying things like normal, but I think that's sort of the crux of it, just like trying to make these conversations feel safer and more productive rather than normal necessarily. But it is also really hard, like Annie was saying, that it's really hard to go from being like, it's okay to talk about it to now everyone says they have it.
It sounds like to me, this is part of having the challenging conversation around stigma and mental health. And I want to acknowledge that our language is not going to be perfect. Not only are we young and still developing our skills when it comes to communication and being able to talk about mental health, I feel that the world is also still coming to terms with how to discuss mental health. Like it's still on that development stage of these are things we need to talk about. It's like I don't want to promote perfectionism when it comes to talking about mental health in general. And that's why something that Meta Cruz said was mental health literacy being important. But I also want to kind of point out something Jack said as well, which was about power and destigmatization kind of having more of a weight to it. And it sounds like to me through this conversation of, we've shifted the definition from it just being a negative misconception to it being a harmful misconception. And it's feeling empowered to be able to address the stigma that is happening in our communities, in our environment, with the older generation in our lives, as well as with the younger generation who are still learning how to have that conversation. So I want to kind of ask you guys, what are ways that you believe, but what are ways that we could, as a community, break that stigma barrier and have discussions? Or if there's anything that you guys think that I really want to talk about this when it comes to stigma, and I want other people to be talking about whatever it may be.
I think one of the really important aspects about breaking the barrier of stigma is kind of what we're doing now, which is taking action. I think that trying to make action more available as well. I know that's something that NAMI Illinois and NAMI National does really well, is creates programs and activities that you can do to be able to take action and break the stigma against mental health and start learning how to have those types of conversations yourself. So I think that's something that's super important. And I hope that with us doing this, it's also encouraging someone listening to take their own action and maybe share their own story as well.
I also think another great way is to educate ourselves and then also educate others just on the destigmatization of mental health and the importance of getting rid of that stigma that mental illness is faced for literally forever. And then also practicing using less stigmatic language like we talked about earlier, kind of evaluating ourselves and how we discuss topics surrounding mental illness and mental health. I think it's another great way to break that barrier.
I want to go back to a little bit of what Annie said about taking action. I think that making sure that you're taking the initiative of helping the community, giving access to people to mental health literacy. I think that's one of the main things that I love to do in my work is getting more people involved in understanding mental health, their own mental health, and the importance of a healthcare team and having it available in languages that are accessible to people. Most importantly, having it free. And that's what NAMI does a lot. So making sure that people are connecting to those affiliations, are getting involved, and are also becoming recovery support specialists. There's so many awesome programmings that are offering a couple of colleges around Chicago and suburban areas surrounding that offer the CRSS success program, so more young adults become recovery support specialists that talk about their stories, share their stories to then create that platform for others to have that conversation.
I also think part of I totally agree with everything. I also think part of increasing mental health literacy and decreasing the stigma is just embracing conversation with others and, when possible, being open. Obviously, it's hard and it's difficult to talk about mental health disorders because oftentimes these are difficult experiences, but I think just being open with people like, oh, hey, I do have generalized anxiety disorder, so that other people can see in action more, I guess, examples maybe, when possible. And I think opening up conversations for people who may not have had exposure to mental health disorders in the past can be really helpful in just our everyday lives.
This has been such both an inspiring and eye-opening conversation, but also I hear the challenge of talking about it. So I want to take a moment to check in with you guys. What's going on in your heads? But just a check-in.
Just
I'm
excited that we're having this conversation. So I'm feeling real excited about it.
Yes, I second that.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a really exciting conversation to be had. I think that, and I've like thought this from the beginning of this work group, that being young adults and being able to talk freely about this is just, I think, so empowering because I mean, I'm sure all of you have experienced it at some point is there's, growing up with, and struggling with mental health conditions, there's definitely like a lot of gaslighting that you encounter, and there's definitely a lot of invalidation that you encounter from other people, whether they would be like, authority to you or family members or whatnot. But I think this is so great that we're able to have this conversation and just talk freely about this. And I think that kind of going to what we were talking about earlier regarding of how we've seen the stigma around mental health change, I think the fact that we have this work group is a sign of that. The conversation around mental health has changed for the better, and I think that what we're doing here right now is proof of that. It's really empowering.
I guess to go off of that, I mean, there's something else to be said about that. With great power, obviously, comes great responsibility. I think that does make it a little difficult for me personally because, you want to say the right things, you want to do the right things. And I mean, especially coming out of an environment where, like, maybe, you know about mental health in theory, but you don't really feel like you can talk about it to the people closest to you. And then, transitioning into a different environment where you're able to talk about those things more. I don't know. It just, I mean, it's exciting, but it's also kind of weird, a little nerve-wracking.
I want to be open with you guys and say I feel really emotional right now hearing you all talk about your stories. And I mentioned this earlier, like I had an environment like with a supportive parent who let me talk about my health in general. And I was supported somewhat by the community. And so hearing some of your stories, like I don't feel like I'm immune to that conversation. And there were certain moments I was tearing up. So I feel that, Ariel, where it's like, it's weird to have such an open conversation while also understanding and mental health as like a general topic, but it's so much deeper. Having this group where we are creating an environment for us to be able to talk about these things openly and have these conversations and be supportive of each other. Because one of the reasons why this group was even created was to have the discussion. I'm so glad that you guys feel similarly and that you're feeling hopeful and that you are excited to be having these conversations. Even though right now, like I feel like an emotional mess hearing about it because I'm like, gosh, I wish I knew you guys earlier so I could support you. But talking to 12-year-old me was probably not the best idea because I would have been like, I probably would have said it gets better, but I would not have known how to help you until, I had these resources that I have now. I appreciate you guys so much for being here and being open about your experiences in these conversations and kind of addressing stigma by doing this. You can find out more about the National Alliance on Mental Illness and NAMI Illinois by visiting namiillinois.org. That's www.namiillinois.org. Thank you for listening to Mental Health Unmuted Grabbing the Aux, a NAMI Illinois podcast. Direction and production for this episode was done by Tekli DeKoontz. Editing this episode was Annie Camps and Ariel Hernandez-Lyons. Special thank you to our panelists and the National Alliance on Mental Illness Illinois State Affiliate for their support to emphasize youth and young adult voices. If you or someone you know is in a crisis, call or text the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 in the United States. For imminent danger, call 911 and request a crisis intervention trained officer.